Welcome to episode 6 of DX Talks. We have a really cool topic today. We are talking explicitly about robotic process automation, and we're going to get into some quite nitty-gritty detail. We're going to be talking about market size and market growth of the RPA sector. We're going to be talking about current market adoption and key adoption trends across the enterprise and other business. We're going to be talking about lessons learned in 2019 and what they mean for 2020. And probably most importantly, the pillars for building a successful program. To help us explore these meaty topics, I'm really excited to welcome Martin Milthorpe, who will be sharing his perspective with us. So Martin, welcome.
Thank you, Russell. Good morning. Yeah,
cool.
Pleasure to be speaking with you and your audience. Thank you.
Nice. So Martin, I had a look at your LinkedIn profile, and you've got a very rich and deep history of experience in the technology sector. There was some cool brand names in there, like Dell and Nokia. You're currently the Regional Partner Director for Australia and New Zealand for UiPath, which of course is a recognised leader in RPA. Do you want to give us a bit of an overview of what that means?
Yeah, well, firstly said it's a very kind intro. My daughters would just say I'm an old man, but it's a very intro. Yeah, so I look after the partnership Australia and New Zealand, to have a team of people to build up our partners. They're absolutely critical to UiPath's growth. We're not building out our own services practice. We see partners as essential to what our customers need to successfully implement intelligent automation across their business. Everything from helping identify the opportunity and building the business case, to process analysis, the development and deployment of automations, ongoing management, proving the business case, and really that entire journey that our customers need will be supported by our partner community across Australia and New Zealand.
Nice. I think the beauty of that is the perspective you're able to share from both a New Zealand and an Australian market perspective. So kicking into the conversation, we're talking today around a set of slides, and if you're listening to this on the podcast, drop down and have a look into the show notes, and we're going to have a link to a video. So if you would prefer, you can watch the video where you'll be able to see those slides as we talk through. So the first thing to really kick into, you've got some data here, and it's based on 2019 research from HFS. So I guess the first question, do you want to give us an overview of market growth to date and where you see the RPA market going in the next 12 to 36 months?
Sure, yeah. The market growth over the last few years, where RPA really started taking off around about 2017. Obviously, the initial phase of growth is phenomenal, which you can see by the yellow bar here, where it was over 100% year on year in that, leading up to 2017. Obviously, the growth has tapered off simply because the market's getting so much larger, but it's still growing phenomenally. You can see the red bar when we look at 2020, the 1.48 billion US dollars there that HFS is expecting this year is the software side of it. So everything such as robotic process automation, intelligent OCR, NLP, natural language processing, all the elements around RPA software, and then the blue being the services piece on top of that. So you can see it's growing really fast. We're seeing these numbers pan out in the Australian New Zealand market. We grew 375% last year. That was off a smallish base in Australia and New Zealand, but we were still in the millions in the year before. Very rapid growth. I think that shows you not just that we're investing and growing, but also that our customers are really seeing value from the automations they're getting, and it's been extraordinary results for many of our customers. So I think that's why we're seeing the market grow really fast. It's a big opportunity.
So to put this into perspective, 2020 is projected to be $5.8 billion globally, and that grows to $13.150 billion in 2023. So we're now talking about a really significant market. I think what's interesting is, and the way this data is presented, it shows the split between software/technology expenditure and RPA services, and that split remains relatively constant across the growth profile of around about 75% to services, 25% to software. What's your view on that split, and why does it sit at that ratio?
sorry, Russell. It's got a bit of a dodgy internet connection here. Can you just repeat the question?
No worries. So I guess we're seeing a split between services and software and technology, and that split remains relatively constant at around about 75-25. So I guess what's your perspective on why the split is set at that ratio and what's driving that ratio?
Well, I think a lot of it is that a lot of what we're selling from a software perspective is the unattended robot licenses, which you'll find in the back office of a business. So, automating things like finance and accounting types of processes. If you think about accounts payable as a process, it's a complex process. It's got hundreds of steps in it when you think about, and the exceptions involved in that. So that the services work to map out that process, all the kinds of exceptions. For example, why would you approve and pay a purchase order versus why would you reject it? Is it missing information? Was it not approved? Values don't match. All these sorts of exceptions that can come up in those types of business processes create for a relatively complex piece of services work. And that's why you see this delta here. So what may be, $10,000-$20,000 US worth of software per process may take, 40, 50, even up to 100,000 US dollars in terms of the services work around that process. I think what we'll start to see over time, though, is we start to move more into what we call attended automation, things like contact center automation. The software versus services will step in the other direction, and that market's really starting to take off. So we're seeing contact center wins and people at the desktop level, their own personal process. Is the market. Our customers have really gone after more complex processes to start with, and that's why you see that big gap there.
That's a really interesting perspective, and if we assume that this data is based on, call it, unattended automation and back office processing, as you point out, that we are moving into some key trends around attended automation and also around user-led automation with citizen developers, and it's almost necessarily going to start creating some interesting call it segments across the data, right? Because certainly when we're talking about attended and citizen-led, we would expect to see a far greater level of software only versus services. So, yeah, that's cool. But I think the key message is, you mentioned, if I sort of close this off, I worked this out, and since 2007, the RPA market has maintained a compounding annual growth rate of over 30% per year. And that's projected to continue until 2023. So the key messages from me would be that robotic process automation has been on a very rapid growth curve. And the second key message is that it will continue to grow rapidly, and we're going to see the technology assume a more prominent position in the enterprise environment.
Absolutely. And I think it's going to move from being a tool to a strategic part of the way organizations do business, hence the growth.
Yeah, cool. If I jump down to UiPath specifically for a second, and I was doing some digging yesterday, so I got this information from Wikipedia, and I'll drop this link into the show notes. Here's a couple of facts they had in there, and one of them is, well, actually, this is known, right? UiPath is consistently recognized as a leading RPA platform. In 2019, UiPath exceeded 5,000 customers worldwide, and I think what's more significant about that is it's up from 700 customers in 2016, which reflects around about 600% growth. In 2019, US 568 million was pumped into UiPath in Series D funding. That's on top of previous funding rounds, which totaled about 408 million, giving the company evaluation. I realize these numbers get a bit subjective sometimes, of 7 billion, and we're walking into an impending IPO. So UiPath as a technology has been on this amazing journey. So I guess my question, from your perspective, how does the market growth over the next few years relate to you guys?
Well, absolutely, we expect to be a big part of it. We're very fortunate. Well, I'm very fortunate to be at UiPath, and we're very fortunate to have been ranked #1 by Gartner and Forrester in this space as an RPA software vendor. I think for us, it's about staying relevant for customers. How do we deliver successful outcomes to customers? And so everything we do, from the way we sell, the partnerships we build up, the platforms that we take to market, it's all geared around customer success. And that's what is going to drive our growth. So yeah, it's just part of our DNA. So we've moved from being, I suppose, simply, an RPA software vendor to really thinking about how do we become an automation platform. So we've acquired some companies, built new tools, really to start to round out our portfolio for customers. So how do they, identify the opportunity, get smarter at finding things to automate? Because I think ideation is a real challenge in the market, right through to, proving the business case, delivering it, supporting it, and having a lot of flexibility around on-prem and cloud. And I think by really rounding out and having, a full automation platform and different ways that customers can deploy, will help us grow and continue taking a great share of this market.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I know we're going to touch on those a bit later. Up to this point, we've been talking about market growth, and the other side of that, of course, is the adoption of RPA technology by the businesses themselves. And again, we've got some data. It's 2019 data from HFS, and I'm curious around your interpretation of how RPA is being adopted in the marketplace.
Yeah, that's a really great point. We can talk about having thousands and thousands of customers, but the question is, where are they really at on the life cycle? So, for example, there's a concept in sales of winning a new logo, but if you could win a huge new customer, so a recognized brand name, but if you've only sold them a couple of licenses, you haven't really helped them transform their organization. That's not digital transformation. They've just bought a tool that's going to sit in the corner that realistically is not part of a strategic program if it's a small deal that's automated one or two things. If an organization has hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of employees, the potential for automation is going to be huge. Take cost business, increase revenue, build their business continuity planning around coronavirus. If their workforce now has to work from home, does everyone have a laptop and remote access? Or and what happens to? I was talking about there's an organisation in Victoria yesterday. Their contact centre staff have just moved to work from home, but everyone had a desktop computer. So they've taken laptops off corporate staff to give them to the contact centre staff. They weren't ready. So you think, okay, so we've now kept the contact centre going, but what happens to the corporate staff? How do they do their jobs? So you think, well, how can automation help around that business continuity planning? So that's what I talk about. When you think about scaled up and industrialized, which is that bucket where the circle is there on this HFS slide, only about 13% of organizations can really say they've industrialized automation. It's right across their business. It's in multiple departments. It's helping their marketing organization identify new opportunities, and it's helping their HR organization assess job applications and go through both assessing people's resumes right through to onboarding new employees, automating those processes, those tedious things, what they're doing in IT, sales, finance, procurement, right across the business. The whole business is benefiting in all sorts of different ways from automation. So we're saying, yep, over 5,000, we're actually over 6,000 customers worldwide now. And we're saying about 13% have really scaled up and industrialized. So, there's another 27% are moving into production. So there's still a huge opportunity within our existing customer base to help them scale up, and working with partners on identifying those opportunities and putting in the right operating model. So it's not enough to just go in there and automate a process and figure out how to manage it. It's how do you start to embed this into the organizational operating model? So, everything around governance, risk, compliance, how do you support it? How do you identify opportunities? How do you prove the value? If you're not proving the value of automation, then in a year's time where, you've got to go back to the CFO to approve, the renewal of the software licenses and the support and maintenance of them, then the CFO goes, well, what's the value to the organisation? I think it's really important that we're proving the value, not just to justify ongoing spend, but inject additional expenditure into automation. So yeah, this just shows, we're still on a journey. There's a lot of growth in our existing customers as well as the overall market.
It's interesting comments. And so again, confirming, as say, this data is showing 13% have scaled, 27% are currently moving to production, and 34% are piloting right now. So without doing the maths, that would suggest around 60% of businesses, according to the survey, are involved in touching RPA and automation in some way, shape, or form at this point. And I guess my question would be, how that 13% who have scaled up, how quickly do you expect to see that grow?
Look, I think it's going to take, quite a while. I think, by the time we say get that 27% moving into production to scale up and industrialize, I think that's probably over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
I think there's, it's not a technology transformation. It's a cultural business transformation. And, all those things around how businesses operate, how they decide to, if you're going to say build a new business unit, how do they, figure out what needs to be done? What do we use humans for? What do we use robots for? Obviously virtual robots, software robots. I think that's going to take time. The way people make decisions, I think, how people not having to work nights anymore, not having to work weekends. Literally, people just overjoyed at having a robot, augmenting what they do, taking away that tedium. So that said, of course, there could be changes to people's jobs. Some positions will be lost over time. But most of what we've seen in the Australian New Zealand marketplace is people's roles have changed. And that does require cultural adjustment, change management, and being considerate towards those people. There is definitely change driven by AI and RPA, but overall we're seeing some really positive benefits from it. Everything from happier employees to happier customers.
I want to touch on coronavirus, and I'm cautious not for us to run down that rabbit hole. We were having a conversation before we started recording, which I think is really relevant. And the question I want to ask is, how do you see, and for reference, if you're listening to this later, this is 17th of March, so we're right in the middle of, I guess, this exploding globally and businesses being really unaware of the impacts this is going to have. How do you see coronavirus affecting how businesses adopt RPA? And necessarily, for those guys that have got it in, where do you see the opportunities? And before I hand over to your answer, I do want to, I'm sure you've sort of caught this, but UiPath as a technology business, I got wind this morning that you guys have built a process, and that process is designed to help businesses screen their staff for a health check. So basically check in on their staff on a daily basis and give a summary report back to the relevant business stakeholders. And more importantly, you've open sourced it and put it out there and said, we've designed this to work with generic business platforms. So, so I want to point out, your team is coming forward and coming to the party and I guess being there for businesses. So yeah, I guess if I loop this back to the question, how do you see coronavirus impacting adoption, and where do you see the opportunities to help businesses through what is invariably going to be a challenging time?
Yeah, so just to touch on the work that we've made available publicly, it came out of our team in China, which is about people just being able to very easily report on how they're feeling, any symptoms, basically a health check so that the company is aware. For example, if someone does have some symptoms, how do you know where have they been, which office are they in, and stuff. So you really want to quickly identify that to help isolate the right people. You don't want to find out, 2 days later that you should have been isolating the whole office. So that automation was put in place maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago in our China team, and we've made the automation available free on our website. So in terms of where we see the RPA market, I think we'll continue to grow in our existing customers. I think it's going to be really difficult to bring on new customers over the coming months during this. We've got some customers that are bunkering down. I suppose some of the more traditional organisations saying, "Hey, we're going to save all our budget and put it into the war chest to get through this." But we were talking about a customer yesterday that has started to ramp up their automation. They see the more automation they can get done now, the better their business continuity planning will be.
Nice, cool. Certainly agree with that. We're definitely hearing that those same messages in the market.
So in terms of having in place, being able to keep this regardless of, yeah. So look, it's mixed messages at the moment. Maybe we'll see that the 2020 growth that was predicted by HFS drop off a bit. But yeah, it's hard to say right now. I suppose it largely depends how long it will last. But one of the things that gives me confidence is that not only can we continue to consult and sell remotely and virtually with customers, but I know majority of our partners can deliver automation remotely. They have experience doing that. It's been happening across countries, between Australia and New Zealand. It's been happening across states where it's our partner based in Melbourne, but working in Adelaide and Perth. But they don't have people flying there. They're able to actually work remotely with the customer. So it's possible to continue, implementing automation during this. So I hope we can provide the value and help our customers to keep the lights on.
Yeah, I think that's a really critical point. You talk about being able to deliver automation, right through from planning to delivery to managing to deploying. You can do that remotely, and I think one of the biggest opportunities for business is, once we get over this initial, call it shock and fear, we're going to be talking really extensively about business continuity. How do we ensure the continuity of business critical processes, of business critical operations, and automation is going to play quite a significant role in that, and from my perspective, as businesses look to de-risk availability of people who are there inconsistently through sickness or fluctuating capacity from their people resources, and more than ever it's going to become a conversation of how does the digital workforce and the human workforce integrate, and what does that future operating model look like.
Absolutely.
So I want to read out a quote here. This is of course one of your slides, and it says, "Coming over the horizon is a new wave of opportunity related to the use of robotics, machine learning and AI." And that's half the quote. And interestingly, it's from McKinsey, so bona fide source, and it's from 3 years ago now. It's from 2017. So in 2017, as a market, we were turning around and talking about this opportunity which is coming over the horizon. And my personal perspective, when I look at, I realize the term AI is quite broad, but robotics, machine learning, I think what we've seen is significant growth in those technologies individually, no questions there. But I think what we're starting to see is the use of those technologies in concurrently or in tangent, however you want to frame it. And you guys, UiPath is certainly a major player in helping make that possible. So I guess, what's your perspective on how these technologies are starting to be used together, and where do you see that going in the short term?
Yes, so certainly this slide is about how organisations are going to compete and have a competitive edge in the future, leveraging these technologies, and they absolutely do come together. I see RPA. I think of a fishbone diagram. I think of the RPA as the kind of the backbone of the fish, and things like machine learning, AI, natural language processing, things like that being the spines, things that you fit into it. So RPA is the glue that pulls it all together. I've seen some interesting automations from, you think about, say, the university sector. The university sector in Australia is highly competitive to win both domestic and foreign students. And the university application process can be tedious, especially for foreign students with transcripts in different languages from their past education. And Sydney Uni has pulled together all these different elements. So things like, Amazon and Microsoft AI, some of their own homegrown AI. They're using Google Translate and OCR. It's like almost the full breadth of options around an automation to take a transcript from a Chinese student that's written in Mandarin, to scan that into the system, translate it to English, reformat it into a way that the university's system understands, and automatically assess their app. You just think that saving costs for the university also means they can respond to the student far more timely than they could in the past. And that could be the competitive difference between the student waiting for a response from one university that might take a month to get back to them, but being able to get back to them within the same day. That's a competitive advantage by bringing all these different technologies together.
Can I ask a question? And I guess that example, that's a perfect example of my view of where the ultimate opportunity is. In your view, is it the leaders who are doing that right now, or is there application of technology, in relevant combinations, is that more mainstream than what I think it is right now?
I wouldn't call it mainstream yet, and I think that's why we see 13% on that previous slide.
Yeah.
There are examples where we're seeing, say, customer service dramatically improve. Things like customer call handling times, call wait times, and things like that dramatically improve by providing with an insurance company that is putting their customers on hold for 3.5 minutes at the end of the call to generate the policy documents and email them back to the customer. That process has gone from 3.5 minutes down to 30 seconds. And that's saving time for the customer, producing a better experience, and it takes some of the tedium away from what that person's doing. So that it's a great opportunity for, how do we improve customer service? How do we improve our operations and things like that? But I think we're really at the tip of the iceberg of the opportunity. I think at the moment, those sort of stories, they're out there, but there are dozens, not thousands, so
yeah,
we've got a long way to go to say it's a mainstream thing we all do.
And this is personal perception for me, I'm interested in your insight on this. My general observation is that a lot of the time these technologies exist in businesses. Take machine learning as an example, or natural language processing, but they exist very separately. Machine learning is a team tucked in the corner around the back over there somewhere, and natural language processing is something else, kind of over there. So, I sort of view businesses as having these technologies, but they haven't yet internally structured their business to have those teams proactively working together to enable these opportunities. Do you see that differently? Do you share that view? Do you have a different view on what's slowing businesses down in these opportunities?
Well, I think only the largest organizations can afford to have a team that looks like that. I think that's why for us it's critical to have a partner ecosystem.
Yeah.
I think our customers, some of them will build a maybe in practice, but we have hundreds of technology alliance partners, everything from AI, NLP, machine learning, data analytics. I mean, think of how many organizations out there like AWS, Google, Microsoft, Abby, Effisoft, Core AI, Data Robot. I mean, there's hundreds of organizations like that. It's just impossible, I think, for any organization to take it all on board. Even if you just pick one vendor from each space, it's there's a lot of complexity around that. Actually, the skills in the market, there aren't that many out there. So I think it's critical that organizations think about what do they want to achieve, what are their strategic objectives around what's revenue growth, cost out, customer satisfaction, how they want to grow and compete in the future, and then find the right partners to bring those skills in, and then figure out what makes sense to built up internally around some kind of automation center of excellence, and what they keep external because the skills are rare and they actually don't need them that much.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really key point that the people who have teams are the biggest enterprises in town, and that's not everyone. In fact, it's not most people. And certainly one of the things I've pointed to in the past is we are going to see the rise of AI as a service, and it's definitely a place I know you guys are playing into very heavily with your ecosystem, and also how you're enabling the integration between partner products and your own. We're heading to a point where it's plug and play, drag and drop. For advanced capabilities like natural language processing, like machine learning, like vision technologies, and I think that's a really powerful opportunity for businesses trying to get into that space. I want to touch on digital transformation, and so there's a quote here: 93% of organisations say that automation kickstarts digital transformation, and I certainly I don't think anyone will disagree with that, and I think that's very much on everyone's radar. We've got a second quote here, which is from a very recent analyst report. It's from Gartner's top 10 strategic predictions, and it says through 2021, digital transformation initiatives will take large traditional enterprises on average twice as long and cost twice as much as anticipated. How do you view that? Do you share that view, and what's causing that? What's slowing down digital transformation?
So I think let's start with the way we as a marketer, guilty of selling, which is, we could go and say, RPA, it's easy, let's just automate things, and it's not easy. Some platforms are easier than others, and that's the feedback we get from the analysts and from a lot of our partners and customers, that our platform is the most simple and business relevant platform, but it doesn't mean it's simple. Let's just call it the least complex. I think, for customers, I think they, like any kind of IT project, it's going to take as long as they decide to put their people into it. I think access to resources, to their people, their infrastructure, their applications, I'd say that's probably the biggest delay at the moment. I don't want to throw our customers under the bus, but reality is, and I think it's good that they think it, and are prepared, that having your infrastructure ready, your security profiles, logins if required for the robots, you've looked at applications be effect interfacing into the same application. What does that mean to the application infrastructure sitting behind that? And having their subject matter experts available. I'm sure that they don't have people sitting idly waiting for someone to come along and say, help me automate something. That they need to, make sure their subject matter experts that understand the process are available for the analysts to come in and work with. So I think the readiness around that will make a huge difference around taking that first point out, which is, on average twice as long. It's preparedness. Cost twice as much as anticipated, and I think that's partly because you've got obviously the software and the services, but there can be compounding things. Like, for example, if it relates to SAP, maybe your licensing with SAP needs to change. Maybe your infrastructure costs will go up because if you're using a cloud service like AWS or Google, Azure or Google Cloud Platform, what you may be spending on infrastructure with humans running, say 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, suddenly if you've got a robot working, it might be working 24/7. So I think it's just looking at what's the total cost of that.
I think there's a couple of other relevant pieces in there. I certainly agree with all of that. I once heard an Australian business leader who had an extensive automation program describe change management as, when you're looking at, and he was talking particularly in relation to automation, when you're looking at automation and you're working out what change management is required, write down what you think, stand up, go outside, have a smoke, take a deep breath, come back in and double it. And if I throw in there another piece from, I think it was Abraham Lincoln, if you give me 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. And a lot of what I heard you talking about there was effectively spending time on planning, preparing, and understanding organizational readiness for digital transformation. That's almost where the majority of the time has to go in order to cut down the actual transformation time and challenge itself, right?
Right, and we've got some free guides on how to do that, how to get ready. Analysts like Gartner, IDC have also put out guides on that, and so we certainly provide those to your customers, so Quanton can share those.
Yeah, cool. I'll grab a couple of those and we'll drop those into the show notes as well. So this is an area I was quite keen to delve into with you, and it was lessons from 2019, and I think we've already talked a lot around some of this, but you guys clearly have number one, a view on Australia and New Zealand, but I think more importantly a view globally and an understanding of I guess what's being learned, and then what that's going to mean for businesses as they move forward. So do you want to share some of those key learnings with us?
Sure. I think the first point here is around task automation versus hyper automation. So hyper automation is a term that Gartner started using, which is talking about when automation is pervasive across an entire organization, and it's using a lot of those tools that we talked about earlier, like AI, machine learning, NLP. So it's more than just RPA, and it's more than just a couple of processes that have been automated. So if we think about task automation, let's talk about we've automated one or two things in the finance department. So that doesn't look like digital, like we've solved a couple of point problems. Two, that's attached to digital transformation. So the organisation is getting much broader benefits. So we're seeing a lot more scale inside of a customer in terms of our license revenue, and a lot more value. So the outcomes for the customer are deep. So RPA has actually become a strategic platform as much as ERP, CRM, HRM platforms are seen as strategic tools. Then you have kind of these little widget tools that someone uses for a point project. That's your task automation. When RPA becomes a strategic tool across the organization, then it's hyper automation. So that's what we see, a change this year. Our sellers, our partners are all adapting to this, and we're starting to see customers starting to adapt to it as well. So we've got customers in the Australian New Zealand market now that have hundreds of robot licenses. Our largest customers worldwide have tens of thousands in Japan and the US. So it's definitely ramping up. The second point is around proof of concepts versus proof of value. So we still have some customers wanting to have a proof of concept. And I say, well, what is a proof of concept? The proof of concept is proving that we can automate a business process. I think we've got 6,000 customers that say, well, it works. We know RPA works. We know our software works in almost any circumstances, whether it's with an application at the desktop level, in the data center, around core mission critical applications. We can work around mainframes with green screens, Citrix Zen desktop. Like the technical side of things, we can work in almost any situation. So case studies across a huge number of horizontal use cases across any vertical, everything from retail to defense to transport to healthcare. There's so many proof points out there. So we're really, in terms of how we want to operate in 2020 and going forward, is what's the proof of value? So the important thing isn't does it work. The important thing is, does it provide value? So if the customer is looking for, if you automate this, what's the likely outcome? And that's where we'd rather bring to them and say, here's a proof of value around HR, marketing, finance, supply chain. Here's the sort of value you can expect from automating these types of processes. And we've actually got process heat maps. So we can actually show our customers, here are the things that we think aren't good candidates to automate. And that's because maybe they're not repetitive, maybe they require strategic thinking and debate and analysis by people. And you say they're not good candidates to automate. So that we're looking for those highly repetitive, rules-based processes. But look at the proof of value and just get started. Get a proof of concept delays the value that a customer will see from RPA. So we really want to ramp it up. Why spend 3 to 6 months checking whether something will work? Because it will, when you actually get started and get to value much faster. The next part is 10 grand to get started. So there have been conversations like this where customers might say, how much does it cost to get started? And I heard answers such as 10 grand, 20 grand to get started, which is just, I think, a bad way of looking at it. I think that sets us back into the task automation space, and it doesn't create the foundation of a strategic program. For a start, it's saying, let's just automate a task and manage it. To think about RPA in terms of what are your goals, and why not budget 25% of your goal. If your goal is to take $10 million out of your business, maybe budget 25% of that, so $2.5 million over 3 years, to start to automate as many business processes as you can. If your goal is to improve customer satisfaction, and in growing your customer net promoter score by 10 or 20 points, you think that's going to return revenue back to your business of a 20% revenue growth? What is that revenue growth? Why not budget 25% of that to automate and get you there faster? So that's the kind of thinking that we'd like our customers to be having.
I jump onto that as well, and if I go back to the market, the market adoption, there was quite a large number of businesses who were sitting in the pilot, and I've got a perception that there's a large bunch of people out there who are sitting in effectively extended pilots, and this is exactly, as you say, this is exactly how they started. It can be, inverted commas, 10K to start, and you can fairly easily automate one process, but it's almost that. So we would generally advocate starting small because it decreases risk, but I think the other side of that is you have to think big at the same time, which comes into, I think, everything you've been talking about is planning. How far do you want to go? What resources are required to get there? What does that look like? What's the governance and all that kind of stuff? And I that's one of my beliefs as to why people are slow to scale, because it's so easy to start that people do, and then they almost get tripped up on, well, how do we actually make this go bigger? It takes a little bit more time to think that through and realize what the implications of that are.
Right, and that's what the last point's about, where we see a line of business level champion. So we might have, say, a finance controller who reports to the CFO, and he's the RPA program sits under them with a bit of support from IT. There's a couple of things they've automated, but it just sits there, and it's providing value to the finance controller's business. Maybe it's accounts payable, accounts receivable, or a couple of processes they've automated. But what about HR and marketing and sales and procurement and all the other things that drive organizational success? So that's where we're going there with organizational readiness. How do we make everything around automation, AI, RPA, and so on have organizational readiness? So we really need a team that has a seat at the table, where how do we look across the entire organization and have that sponsorship from the C-suite across the business to say, what are we strategically attaching ourselves to? What's the value driver that the company board or the C-level, what do they want from automation? Or what are they trying to deliver back to their shareholders or their stakeholders? And how do we get the organization ready for that? So that's where I'm coming from with organizational readiness. We need to take this out of that line of business level champion, think about how do we get organizationally ready to adopt automation and realize the benefits right across the business.
Yeah, and I think that's a great message. If automation is living somewhere down the chain inside a department, it'll absolutely return value, but that value will be limited to the department. And I guess the key message, which has actually been around for a while, but I think is now almost truer than ever, is this has to be, RPA and automation has to be recognized by senior leaders as a strategic platform, as a strategic play, because that is the fundamental start, of the ability to create organisational-wide value. The absence of that recognition will probably limit it to department-level benefit wherever it happens to be sitting.
Right, right.
I think there's a couple of we've almost got into this next point I wanted to pick up already. We talked about hyper-automation, and historically, I think all RPA platforms sort of started here around build, to use your words on the slide, build, manage, run. And I've already mentioned some of the numbers relating to UiPath's growth, but I'd highlight from an outsider's view, there's been a huge amount of investment go into your product development and the development of your product roadmap over the last 24 months. And I think in the last 6 months in particular, we've seen some really huge moves on your platform in terms of what it's delivering and what you're bringing to market. So, and you've already touched on some of this already, but do you want to take us through, what you're now doing and how effectively how you're helping organizations be hyper automation ready?
Sure, thanks, Russell. I think in planning, the planning phase is obviously critically important, and I think we've been heavily reliant on waiting for customers to come up with ideas. They have a light bulb moment. Here's a couple of things we want to automate, and we go in and help them automate it. What we've built, and also we've acquired across the entire organization. So we're basically taking both a crowdsourcing ideation type approach to RPA and letting everyone in the organization feed in ideas, and the way they present the data back into the internal team that will assess the ideas will actually provide some data around how repetitive is the process, is it rules based, is it a candidate for automation, and then what's the value? So estimate the value of that process, and also do apply some science to it. So start to monitor things like complex organizational processes. Actually monitor it 24/7 as it runs. Be able to map out the process, all the exceptions, where the delays are, map SLAs against those processes, and then also do that at the task level. So record tasks at the desktop level, and look at what is happening at a desktop level that we can actually scientifically identify it. So the person sitting there working through, say they're on Salesforce or ServiceNow, they're doing something repetitive, that we actually want the software to identify that opportunity without that person having to be the one that comes up with the bright ideas. They will actually scientifically say, hey, we've actually identified something that user or multiple users across the organization is doing the same thing repetitively. We automate that. Here's some value to the organization. So a lot around that whole planning phase of an organization to come up with ideas scientifically that people may not otherwise come up with. They may not realize there's organizational benefit. And then on the back end of that is measuring it. So analytics to look at whether it's cost savings, productivity, so hours returned to the business, customer NPS, employee NPS, whatever those KPIs are, to provide tools, dashboards to our customers as well to help realize the benefit of that. So as much as you want to obviously plan and identify the opportunity, you need to prove the value by really that cycle of investment to go back into ongoing automation.
I think, sorry, carry on.
So I was just going to go, so the core part on this slide, build, manage, run, that's our traditional core RPA platform. But that fifth box there, engage, which is about people and robots working together. So we've invested very deeply over the last 12 months in human augmentation rather than human replacement. So how do we enable someone to work more effectively? We want people, we don't want people working like robots. We want people to be strategic, coming up with ideas on how to grow the business, how to be more effective at customer satisfaction. So this is a couple of things. One's about long-running processes. Sometimes processes take weeks or months, and you want a human to be involved in the loop there. Sometimes we want humans to kick off the the automation. Like put in some data. I actually have one on my own desktop, which extracts data out of Salesforce. I select the fiscal period, the partner I want to report on, and then it extracts data and formats it into PowerPoint slides for me to go and present a business plan to a partner and say, here's where our business is at. Now that process would take me a couple of hours to build those slides per partner, and now it takes me 2 minutes. I still have a job, but I'm now actually more effective at my job. So I don't think that robot's going to take me out of my job, but it certainly helps me do my job much better, much more professionally than I was able to beforehand, and frees me up. So that's what the engagement piece is all about.
Yeah, I think if I bring all that together, like again from an outsider's perspective, I mean I'm really excited about what you guys are doing, and I look at it, you know, number one, you've shifted to address the entire automation lifecycle, and you know, historically, as you say, build, manage, run, it was very much around the process, whereas now it's key message. It's looking at the automation lifecycle end to end. Number two, you've created integration, accessibility, and simplicity. And I think, you know, particularly as businesses had started to scale, they almost wound up with a robots versus the people, you know, robots on one side of the fence and the people on the other. Whereas what this is doing is, you know, you started to touch on sort of human in the loop, and I think some of the functionality that you've brought out, you are bringing those two workforces together. You are enabling the accessibility of automation. You know, and again, automation used to be this little team in the corner, whereas a lot of what you have now is enabling accessibility by the wider workforce, by citizen users, to directly help them in what they're doing. And I think the last one, and potentially the most important, is transparency and visibility. And I think I hijacked you and sort of cut you off before you got to the last piece, but you know, you're no longer is automation this thing that happens on this platform with these logs that someone has to go and pull out if someone really wants something. There is a huge amount of visibility around what's going on and what the quantifiable benefit back to the business is, which I think has been quite hard to get to in the past, whereas you guys are bringing it to the light.
Yeah, and I think especially as things start to move into hyper automation, it does need, you know, we can't be measuring value on spreadsheets and serviettes. we need tools and dashboards because, you know, if it's going to be an enterprise platform, we really need to be measuring things properly and be really flexible about what we measure.
Yeah. So this last slide is, I think, one of my favorites, and consistently when we listen to what's being said in the market, there's no shortage of people who either have a program and want to grow it, or who are really committed to the idea of automation, and they're simply saying, how do we start? And how do we start, I think, translates to two things. What people are asking is, how do we achieve quick wins? How do we prove the value? How do we get some stakeholder buy-in? How do we prove this is going to work for us? But more importantly, how do we set ourselves up for success? How do we make sure that whatever we put in it will grow? It's not going to sort of fizzle out and be that thing in the corner. And you know, we've heard about operating models. We've touched on organizational readiness, and we've sort of alluded to some of the things in there, right? Like how do you manage your pipeline, you know, governance and frameworks. And UiPath has, like, it's actually, it almost, and sorry, when I talk about those things, they almost sound like simple concepts to talk about, but they're not. There's so much behind them. And what I like about, so you guys have presented a 7-pillar framework, and what I like about it is that it really simply summarizes what people have to be thinking about to be successful in the future, in my mind, without hiding the level of detail that's going to exist behind each of those. So I'm curious to hear you sort of introduce the 7-pillar framework and talk us through it a little bit.
Sure. So we touched on digital transformation earlier, and we see that RPA is really where your quick wins will be in digital transformation, which is fantastic. So rather than multi-year journey to eventually get to digital transformation, we can get some quick wins that can take weeks or certainly no more than months to get there. But really to scale, it's going to start with executive visioning. So this is where I'm saying hyper automation versus task automation. So it's going to start with something that's strategic, the C-level cares about across the organization. What is that foundation, the strategic imperative that we're attaching to? And then you can get some quick wins that align to that, and then report back to justify ongoing expenditure and resourcing of the program. Putting in the automation operating model. So if that's skipped, in fact, where it is skipped, we don't see scale. So customers we sold, say, a few licenses to a year or two ago that haven't put in some kind of operating model, a framework around how the robots are supported, governed, the business case is proven, everything around, the same way that we as people, we're on a payroll, we have performance reviews, we deliver results to the business, we're assessed. Well, the same thing needs to happen with robots. When that doesn't happen, we don't see those customers grow. Where we see the automation operating model go in, we see growth, we see lasting results, and a strategic program to automate more and more that has executive buy-in. And I see an organisation, one of Australia's largest employers, using UiPath. It's got the strategic attention of the C-suite. They're investing. They're hiring dozens of, so they started off growth. That's how convinced they are. But it started with that executive vision. They've got the operating model in place, and they're rapidly expanding because they can see the value of it. So that's what that is. The foundation for growth is all about. The challenges to growth is really identifying that value, and hence our insights platforms to have those dashboards and reporting. Business outcome process intake. So what's the outcome we're trying to achieve? What are the processes that we're putting in there? Demonstrating the business value around automating those, having the right procedures around that to justify automating a process. IT automation readiness. This is a pretty simple one around infrastructure. We have a customer that bought our software middle of last year. They still haven't implemented because their infrastructure isn't ready. Look, that's a very slow organization to move. We'll be launching on cloud as well soon, but having your infrastructure ready, your IT readiness is critical to growth. And it's actually Gartner that called that out as one of the things that really slows down RPA more than anything else is IT readiness. Controls framework, well, that's your governance, risk, compliance. That's how are we monitoring the robots? How is it recording data? If someone has PCI records, what does that mean around automation and the way sensitive data is handled? So having that controls framework in place is really important to growth. And then the long-term piece is the pathway to growth, which is the citizen-led that you touched on there, Russell. And that's how do we enable people across the organisation, maybe your power users. So maybe that's training your team to be able to do some basic automations at the desktop level. So it's not necessarily having a team or a partner organisation come in and do the automation, but your own people being able to do some simple automations themselves.
I think perhaps one of the really important pieces is, as evident on the slide, you're showing those 7 pillars, and underneath there you've got a line connecting them all, saying interconnected, and the key message would be you can't have some of those things or 90% of them. You actually have to the degree that's relevant to your organization, you have to have addressed all of those things, and they all have to be working together, because failure to do so creates effectively a weak link, which jeopardizes your progress. You touched on an interesting point in there as well, which is around IT readiness. And I think, the challenge to businesses is how do you decouple the rate of business change from technology change? And I don't think we'll solve that in this conversation, but I certainly think that's one of the things for businesses to consider. How do you decouple those two dependencies? And you touched on your cloud model which is from memory is in public preview at the moment, and it's actually really exciting. It's, you know, it's already in my mind going to shake up the market. We're moving to robots as a service, and whilst you guys have certainly shared no plans, you know, I'm sort of excited about some of the possibilities which exist. You know, necessarily being able to hire a robot for an hour or pick up a bunch of robots for a month to deal with a peak capacity. I think that the future opportunities that could come out of cloud software as a service for automation are really exciting. And that's certainly one example of decoupling business change from IT automation readiness, right? You're no longer dependent on the state of your own infrastructure for automation. You can go to the cloud. Yeah, and that's simply one example, which I think is quite cool.
Absolutely. So yeah, for organizations that want to move into hyperautomation as a, you know, I suppose a foundation for digital transformation, this is the journey they need to go on.
Cool. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking to Martin Milthorpe today. Martin is the Australian New Zealand Regional Partner Director for UiPath. Martin, I certainly appreciate your time. I know it's valuable, and I know our audience will appreciate the insights that you've shared with us today.
Thank you, Russell. It's been an absolute pleasure, and hope the insights have been really helpful for your audience. Thank you for listening.
Sounds good.